Surprise! It's an unexpected, unpromoted podcast that we're dropping here in mid-January. I continue to find ways to occupy my time, lest I go mad. Well, I also really got into the idea last year of featuring actors and directors we had rarely or never featured on this channel before. We have discussed the Marx Brothers a few times, the Marx Brothers, but it's been nearly 11 years since we reviewed Duck Soup and A Night at the Opera. Anyway, before I yammer on about horse feathers, let's promote something great. And if you listen to this podcast with any regularity, then I don't even need to tell you what product I'll be plugging. But I will anyway. It's Sparkplug Coffee. They offer you the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in all of Canada. A wide assortment of blends and roasts are on the docket. They even offer rotating seasonal blends, and that bag can be jammed with half-calf beans or decaf beans. I mentioned Canada a minute ago. Well, that's where I live, and my fellow country folks will get free shipping. Our orders will be on the front step within a week, as they will for Americans, but our Yankee neighbors can't enjoy that free shipping. Yet those Americanos and we Canadianos can and should sign up for a membership in the Autopilot Coffee Club. That gets you so many perks and deals that you'll wonder where these perks and deals have been all your life. Members also save money on every order. Before you go thinking this is a Coffee of the Month Club, keep in mind that you can customize your membership to get your orders when it suits you. So if you're trying to run a college while you fool around with two fools, then you can put a pause on your regular deliveries. You can even just flat out cancel if you need to. You gotta love flexibility. All right, wacky professors, before you start screaming at me about where you can find this stuff, I will tell you. Go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Our HYES promo code will knock 20% off your next Sparkplug bill. So that takes care of the pre-prepared remarks. My prepared remarks are naturally all about the movie in question, so I'm going to tell Andrew he's up. Hit that theme song, sir, and action. Have you ever seen horse feathers? Ahoy hoy, and welcome to this surprise 563rd edition of Have You Ever Seen? I didn't even promote last Friday or this past Monday that I would be doing this today because I wasn't even sure when it would be ready. Well, here it is. I found some free time here in the doldrums of January. I'm your solo host today, Professor Ryan Ellis, ready to spoil all the glorious secrets of horse feathers. Bev is, of course, not here because she never is on Fridays. This will be a monologue. When I analyze on my own, I inch my way through every scene, often throwing in a plethora of asides in the form of reasonably good questions. Reasonably good, not usually very good. And I try to make you giggle with my own brand of tomfoolery. Although it's a Marx Brothers movie, so trying to make jokes about a movie that's filled with them might be a stupid thing to try to do. But I'm stupid enough to take that bet. Let's set up what we're talking about today. The wildest picture panic in screen comedy history was released by Paramount on August 19th, 1932. The IMDb claims the wildest picture panic thing was a tagline on the poster. I don't know what the panic part of that has to do with anything in this film. Very little panicking. Anyway, it doesn't look like this was seen by every eyeball in the world that year, but it wasn't some massive dud that lost a pile of money for Paramount either. On Rotten Tomatoes, this filmic endeavor scores well. It has 97% positive reviews, while 86% of audiences like it too. 30 critics have reviewed it, and their average rating is 8.3 out of 10. In fact, all of the Red Letter Marx Brothers titles have been beloved by the Tomatoes crowd over the years. The boys have a few splats, but critically speaking, most of their flicks even managed to outdo what I think is easily their best and funniest film, Duck Soup, which scores well too. If you review films for a living, you probably say nice things about Groucho, Chico, Harpo, and Zeppo. The American Film Institute voters ended up putting Horse Feathers 65th on their top 100 laughs, which is the main reason I'm covering it, trying to get through those AFI lists that aren't the main lists, the comedies, the passions, the cheers, etc. Duck Soup was all the way up at number 5, while A Night at the Opera was 12th, and A Day at the Races was 59th. The boys were also 20th on the dude side of AFI's top 50 stars list, so 25 women, 25 men, but they were one entry. Groucho, Harpo, and Chico were all mashed together, not Zeppo. That's one spot ahead of Buster Keaton, by the way. I like the Marx Brothers, but it's absurd that these goofy masters of the absurd made that list. They shouldn't rank on there at all, I don't think. Chaplin, yes, and he was 10th, by the way. Keaton, okay, sure. And yes, I'm glad the voters didn't overlook the great comedy stars the way you might expect they would on a list like that. But come on. The Feathers was also a nominee for the sports category of AFI's top 100 genres. If Chris and I had kept our Scoring at the Movies podcast going, this is a film I think we would have gotten to. We did Scoring at the Movies for, how many years was that, 5 years? We gave it up last June. As for memorable quotes, one of the lines in this that was indeed nominated for the AFI's Greatest Movie Quotes in History list was an exchange between Chico's Baravelli character and Thelma Todd's Connie character. He says, "You sing a high." She says, "Yes, I have a falsetto voice." And then he comes back with, "That's funny. My last pupil, she got a false set of teeth." You could have nominated a lot more of Chico or Groucho's lines for that list, from any of the movies, really. But at least one of them was up for that list from this movie. And I believe one line from Animal Crackers on their filmography made the top 100. That was the one about shooting an elephant in my pajamas. Groucho's thing. How'd that go again? "I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How I got my pajamas, I'll never know." More accolades. ESPN ranks this movie number one on their 2008 list of top 11 moments in football movie history. They've got scenes from Remember the Titans, Harold Lloyd's The Freshman, the original Longest Yard, Friday Night Lights, Rudy, Jerry Maguire, and North Dallas 40 in that article. Chris and I reviewed all 7 of those on Scoring at the Movies, incidentally. Randy Williams' piece seems to consider the entire game at the end of Horse Feathers as the greatest moment, although I guess he focuses on when Harpo scores the winning touchdown. So that's your top moment in football movie history? Okay, Randy. All right, it's time to piece through this balderdash, which is what Horse Feathers means, incidentally. That or nonsense. Let's zip through the rip-roaring adventures of the man in the Tyrolean hat, the clown in the wig, and the pun machine with the grease paint mustache. The picture is made in Hollywood, but it's set at Huxley College. I think that's fictional. Pretty sure it is. Groucho Marx plays the school's newly hired college president, Professor Quincy Adams Wagstaff. Wonder how long the brothers spent brainstorming Groucho's names. Rufus T. Firefly, Otis B. Driftwood, Dr. Hugo Z. Well, Zed, I'm Canadian, but Dr. Hugo Hackenbush, Quincy Adams Wagstaff. I bet it was a while, like the Simpsons writers talk about brainstorming background gags for signs on stores in their show. Anyway, Groucho speaks to an assembly and makes his typical Groucho double entendres for a bit, then sings, "Whatever it is, I'm against it." I looked it up on Spotify, and I'm not sure if that's an actual song that either came from this movie or before it. I think there's other versions, but anyway, I've never heard this song before. It's catchy. But anyway, they've chosen an anarchist to be their boss. Well, that's one way to go. Zeppo Marx plays Quincy's son Frank. In Groucho's always wordy way, he says he's ashamed of his boy, but Frank wants Pops to improve the football team so they can whip Huxley's big rival, Darwin. I thought right away that Huxley and Darwin referred to Aldous Huxley and Charles Darwin. And my Darwin assumption is correct, apparently, but I guess Huxley is a reference to Thomas Huxley, who was a big believer in Charles's theory of evolution. That's a pretty interesting reference. As for the rival Darwin, the David Landau character Jennings pays off a few tough guys to play for Darwin just to screw over Huxley. One of my favorite old-timey words crops up in this scene. He gives them dough. Gotta get our dough. If you're thinking that we're overdue to meet Chico and Harpo, you're right. So here's Chico. And it's pronounced that way because it was all about his love of the ladies, the chicks. Of course, that's not his real name anyway. He loved the chicks, so he's Chico. I always thought it was Chico until I heard, I think Leonard Maltin explained that one time. Anyway, the cheekster is Baravelli. He works as an iceman at a nearby speakeasy. He's not a Navy pilot in Top Gun. He's not that iceman. He actually sells ice. I guess that was big business 90 plus years ago. The boss wants him to work the door of the nightclub for a while, telling him that the password to get in is Swordfish. I think the Hugh Jackman, John Travolta action flick used that as their title as a tribute to this movie. I think I read that when I saw that movie 20 plus years ago. Or maybe the team behind that film just liked the animal, or liked eating the animal. Anyway, Wagstaff is at the door trying to get in the club, and he finally stumbles across the word swordfish, but only after much jokey prompting from Baravelli, who basically just gives it to him. It was amusing. The final Marx we meet in this movie is Bev's favorite, Harpo. He's Pinky, also an Iceman, plus he has a side hustle as a dog catcher, which is made very clear by a sign on the Silent Clown's hat. He's also, as he always is in these Marxy movies, Chico's partner. Since Harpo never speaks, Mr. Propman just pulls a sword and a fish out of his huge trench coat and sticks the sword in the mouth of the fish. So he's in, although if he works with Baravelli and works there, shouldn't they just let him in? Wagstaff recruits what are clearly grown men in these two nincompoops to play football for Huxley, also managing to scam about $15 out of the bartender. That was a funny bit, that whole check. It was pretty good. I guess I'm taking for granted you've seen the movie because I know I'd explain this thing piece by piece, but you do a movie like this, you can't explain every joke. I think you get that point. It should be noted that this club is not just selling booze, but they're bootlegging it. In 1932, America was still in the middle of Prohibition. Baravelli pouring booze when we first meet him is a pretty nose-thumbing thing to do in a major motion picture at this point in history. I think Prohibition was repealed, the year after. We get clear proof that Pinky really does rustle stray pooches because he drives a truck with dog catcher written on the side and has a whack of pooches imprisoned inside. When you don't speak, I guess you have to let your props and signs do a lot of talking for you, obviously. And it's nice to know his hat wasn't lying. Who wants a lying hat? There were some hijinks with a cop in this scene, then a lot more when Chico and Harpo go to class. It gets even loopier after Wagstaff shows up in the classroom too for some reason. Although I guess he's a teacher, they say Professor Wagstaff. Quincy even ends up teaching biology, despite Pinky's best efforts to muck everything up. The woman we had met in Zeppo's first scene is Thelma Todd, who's Connie. She's known as a college widow, which means that she's not even a student anymore, but hangs around and dates boys who are students. I get older, they stay the same age. All right. Throughout this flick, Connie will get around, spending a little romantic time with all four brothers, and she's also Jennings' plant, first trying to mess with Frank's head, but also the other three guys later on. Wagstaff ends up romancing Connie, while the other two Marxes keep bringing her blocks of ice, and then throwing them out the window. So wasteful. This is your job, guys. Respect your own job. Curiously, there's a sequence in this scene where there are about 5 jump cuts in maybe 10 seconds. I saw It's a Wonderful Life right before Christmas, like I always do, and it had a slew of jump cuts too. I've seen that movie well over 10 times. I don't think I've ever noticed just how many jump cuts there were. I was reading that the jump cuts in Horse Feathers happened because of damage to the film itself. Maybe that's the answer for all these old movies that have the jump cuts. So there's no way of getting around it. You cut out the frames that won't play anyway, and just have to live with the fact that Groucho goes from one spot to a foot or two away in the blink of an eye. But all this talk about Groucho so far, and I've come to realize I'm a Chico guy. Groucho was a physical comedian, sure, but was better known as a guy who never stopped making puns and spouting double entendres. I like the way Chico does essentially the same thing, having fun with words. He just speaks at a slower pace, pot kettle here, Ryan, and isn't so sexually suggestive as Groucho is, or was. And I think his one-liners land better because, for one thing, he doesn't talk nearly as much as Groucho does. And he's got a cuteness to him as well. And I guess the girls thought so because he was called Chico. And it seems to me that Groucho would be exhausting to be around after a while. And I've read that he was always on, even when he was home with his family. Harpo is a little much sometimes too. Bev won't like to hear that if she hears this podcast. When she hears this podcast. But if someone pulled what he does in real life, someone would eventually murder him or throw him in front of a speeding sports car. And again, a little bit much with even these short movies. A little goes a long way. Another notch for Chico is that he was a fabulous pianist. He's got a Victor Borgia quality, there's an old reference, playing the piano like a virtuoso, but also with a lot of comedy and verve. There's a massively underused word there, verve. So he tickles the keys to impress Connie in this scene, mostly because no Marx Brothers movie would be complete if he didn't play the piano. I thought the football game was about to start when there was still about 25 minutes left to go in the running time, which is not that much less than half the movie, but we're only in the locker room for a short while. It's clear that Pinky and Baravelli aren't professional footballers, so Frank is disappointed to see his dad bother to spend time recruiting them. We saw Chico play the piano a few minutes ago, so that means now we see Harpo play the harp. And just like Baravelli impressively tickled those ivories just to impress Connie, Pinky works the big strings for seemingly the same reason. And I don't know much about harp playing, but the silent Marx brother always seemed like he could have done this professionally. He's really good. The musical scenes in the Marx flicks are literally showstoppers. They stop the story just so these two really talented SOBs could show off. It's almost like if Adam Sandler put a pickup basketball game in one of his movies that had nothing to do with basketball, just to show off how good he is on the court. And he is really good on the court. Believe me, if you didn't know that, look him up. He's a damn good basketball player. Not that I'm complaining, but the Marx Brothers did have a formula with their comedies. I can't remember not seeing the piano and the harp in one of their motion pictures at some point. And I've seen, I think, all of them? All their big movies? Sticking with a Marx brother playing an instrument, the next scene after Harpo is stroking the strings is Groucho being paddled in a canoe by Connie while he plays guitar and sings a love song. And since Connie's role was to steal the football signals from Frank, now she's trying to get them from Quincy while they drift along in that boat. After she falls in the water and asks him to throw her a lifesaver, there's only one way that gag can go. The sweets come out of his pocket and he pitches them into the water near her. When was the last time I had a lifesaver? Maybe I should put them on my Christmas list this year. So many months away. Meanwhile, Pinky and Baravelli have been assigned the task of cornering Jennings' huge recruits for Darwin's team so they can get rid of them and keep them from playing, although Harpo takes a giant haymaker in the jaw from both of them at the same time. You should be in Madison Square Garden in a title match if you can take a shot like that and quickly get back up. And considering how often this guy screws with people in this and other movies, it was probably long past time that somebody did punch him out, even if the effect only lasts for a few seconds. He's the original Rocky Balboa, I guess. A Rocky Balboa can take anything. Pinky and Baravelli were supposed to keep the big guys away from the football field, so P and B are the ones who get locked in their room while the brutes prepare to head out for the game. Although the merry pranksters manage to find 2 saws and cut their way through the floor, ending up back in the room with the 2 big guys. Pinky and Baravelli end up stripped down to their underwear by them, which means now the Darwin recruits can head out for the game. But you can't keep the Marxes down, those Marx brothers. They saw their way through another floor and end up ruining a bridge game between several polite ladies. You'd think that those 2 guys would have taken the saws away from them after the first time they did it. They're only in long underwear, and going into the out-of-doors dressed like that was pretty scandalous back in those days, but they hustle off to get to the game ASAP. They even end up in a garbage can chariot type thing, which figures into the very end of the game we're about to see. Hike! It's football time. You don't hear hike anymore. It's always hut. I'm a hut guy anyway. I'm good with hut. The game has been going on for a while, and Darwin is winning 12-0, so Wagstaff gives a Groucho-esque motivational speech. He's giving it to the wrong team, though, which was one of the funnier moments in the film, especially after Zeppo tells him he's talking to the wrong guys. His dad's response is that he knows this, but his own team wouldn't listen to him anyway. Chico and Harpo finally show up and play without helmets because why not? And Groucho even comes off the sidelines to tackle a Darwin player very illegally because why not? Naturally, a lot of hijinks ensue over the next 6 to 8 minutes. It's a cavalcade of wisecracks and physical comedies. They trample on the good name of the sport of concussions. Ooh, zinger. I mentioned that the boys aren't wearing helmets. Well, after Harpo scores a touchdown to make it 12-6, I noticed just how many players on both sides weren't wearing helmets. In fact, there are probably more empty-headed Darwinians than Huxleyites. And then because they must, the Marxists help their team win the game with Harpo scoring the winning touchdown. Then one of the boys throws him another football from the trash chariot and he gets credit for another touchdown. And another. And another. Stop running up the score! Bad form. As a very weird button, the justice of the peace marries all three of them to Connie, who then pile on her and we're out. Is this movie now set in Utah? Zeppo was her loving boyfriend when the movie started, but he's nowhere to be found. Poor Zeppo. So the cast. The Marx Brothers were in those two flicks that ranked on AFI's Top 100 Movies list in 2007. Duck Soup made it then, but also in 1998. A Night at the Opera only made the cut the second time in 2007. We haven't talked about these guys since, mostly because it feels like, even though these guys are always pretty funny and inventive with their gags and one-liners, if you've gone over one Marx flick, you've gone over them all. And as we said when we covered A Night at the Opera, it had no business making that second list anyway. Yeah, it has that legendary stateroom scene and some other good stuff, but one of the 100 greatest films ever made by the AFI voters? Come on. As for Groucho, he never seemed to stop working. He appeared as himself in a lot of people's TV shows, Jack Benny, Bob Hope, Jackie Gleason, and starred in the quiz show You Bet Your Life, for over 10 years, throughout the 50s and into the early 60s. He was given an honorary Oscar in 1974. His brothers are mentioned in the dedication, but Chico died about 13 years earlier, and Harpo had shuffled off nearly a full decade before, so the award was Groucho's to accept alone. Although to be clear, Jack Lemmon did mention all of the boys in his introduction. Zeppo was still alive, and for several more years after this, but he didn't show up on the stage with his far more famous brother. Julius, that's Groucho's real name, said that he wished all his brothers were there with him, but he did spend time paying tribute to Adolf, who's Harpo, and Leonard, who's Chico. He also gave a shout-out to their mother, and then he thanked Margaret Dumont, who was so often his straight woman and a lady who, he claimed, never understood his jokes. That was a big night for Jack Lemmon, by the way. Not only did he present Mr. Marx with this trophy, but he won his own Oscar that night, his second, this time for Best Actor for Save the Tiger. He had won for Best Supporting Actor in 1955 for Mr. Roberts. One more note about Groucho. I think a lot of comedians have been influenced by him. That's not exactly surprising to say, but I can think of two specific examples of people I think really worshipped him a lot, two huge names. One was when Robin Williams was leaving the stage after winning his Oscar in 1998 for the 97 movies. He did a silly walk that looked the way Groucho did, his own hunched-over silly walk that he did all the time in his movies. And the other is Woody Allen. Early Woody in his movies would do a face similar to what we often see Groucho do in these movies. I guess specifically when he pretends to be bashful with a woman. I think that was what Woody was doing, an imitation of Groucho. And we know he's a big fan of the Marx Brothers. He had them in at least one of his movies, meaning his character watched one of their movies. Yeah, the Marx Brothers were a team, but Groucho himself did transcend the others as far as long-lasting influence. Harpo and Chico did some TV things, and possibly some movies without the Grouch, but it seems like whenever they worked on the silver screen, it was as a team with their little brothers. If not always, then almost always. Zeppo was the youngest, although not nearly young enough to be believable as Groucho's son. So Groucho was not the oldest. I always thought he was, but looking this up, no, he wasn't. Zeppo was only in about a half dozen flicks in total. His last was Duck Soup, which means Horse Feathers was his second last film. Zeppo always had to be the straight man and carry the story, and I guess he got tired of doing that when he wanted to be allowed to be funny like they were, which he pretty much never was in these movies, was he? He gave it up to work for a talent management company with their other brother, Gummo. Thelma Todd only worked for about a decade and was done with film acting 4 years after this. She was in the 1931 version of The Maltese Falcon, but also did monkey business with the brothers. David Landau, the guy who hires those thugs to play for Darwin, went on to do She Done Him Wrong the next year, a film I covered last year, in January. He was also in I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which came out in 1932, same year as this. Their director, and I've not even said his name until right now, was Norman Z. MacLeod. Zed, I'm Canadian, although there's no Z in the animated opening credits. He was at the helm of Monkey Business the year before, and went on to work with W.C. Fields in It's a Gift, and Cary Grant in Topper. He also directed Bob Hope in The Paleface. The man knew how to make a comedy. Those are some big-name guys he worked with. Although when you work with legends like that, it's no wonder your own name gets lost in the shuffle, and you only get mentioned in a review like this at the very end. Sorry, Norman, but you're long dead. The writers were Burt Kalmar, Harry Ruby, S.J. Perelman, and Will Johnstone. Kalmar had credits on other Marx motion pictures, including Duck Soup. He also shared an Oscar nomination with Harry Ruby for writing a song in a film called The Strip, which came out 20 years after Horsefeathers. Beyond that, he often worked with the G, the H, and the C. Perelman won an Oscar for writing, only that was for the adapted screenplay for the 1956 Best Picture winner, Around the World in 80 Days. Beyond that, yep, Mark's movies. Will Johnstone only wrote 2 screenplays. The other one was Monkey Business. Herman Mankiewicz, Mank, was the uncredited producer. 9 years later, he wrote Citizen Kane with Orson Welles, won an Oscar for that, and eventually got his own biopic directed by David Fincher. If I didn't say already, I caught this movie by recording it off TCM, so if you haven't seen it and maybe want to, they'll probably run it again. They often run movies pretty soon after the first time. Or maybe the 21st time for this, for all I know. The 137-1 black and white print was fine. I've seen worse, especially for a movie as old as this is. I'm not in a league with Woody Allen on these guys. He seems to worship them. I just don't find them to be gut-bustingly hilarious every time I see them the way that I think he does. Their movies are certainly anarchic and fun. I definitely respect that they did that, I think, in every film. It's just that even an hour of Groucho, and even Harpo doing the things that they always did, the punning and the wordlessness, can be a little much. I'd be curious to see if modern audiences would enjoy their best comedies. I guess they do, according to the AFI lists, but then that's older people often voting for them on those modern lists, and those aren't even really modern anymore. The 98 list was 25 years ago, 26 years ago almost. Now, on the other hand, we always say around here that comedy doesn't age well, but this brand of tomfoolery I wouldn't say is dated. It's not like I didn't laugh at all. Maybe this or Duck Soup is a flick we should recommend to our nephew Nathan, who's learning about filmmaking in university. I'd love to know if an 18-year-old would laugh at this. You might say, of course it wouldn't, he'd think it's lame. But this young man is willing to watch films that are nearly 100 years old, and he wants to learn about filmmaking, and he's seen some really old films so far since the beginning of last semester. So I bet he'll watch something like this someday soon, and for all I know, he might like it more than I did. And I did enjoy their anarchy and tomfoolery, I just didn't laugh out loud that much. So that was how I saw Horsefeathers. I wasn't going to promote the next episode, but I now know this will go up on January the 19th, so I pretend I don't know. And I've now decided to do The Picture of Dorian Gray. So I'm doing 3 Fridays in a row. I wanted to do 3 comedies, but I couldn't find one that fit. I've had that movie on the PVR forever. Canadian PVR, not DVR. So pedantic. Anyway, that's next week's movie on Friday, the 26th of January. How about showing us some appreciation by rating and reviewing this or any other podcast we've done? Write a comment on YouTube. @HYES Ellis is how you can find us on the tubes. And subscribe so you don't miss any of our shows, either on YouTube, your podcast app, or maybe both. Bev and I continue to linger on Twitix. My handle is @MovieFiend51 and hers is @BevEllisEllis. Our email address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. And be a dear and wander over to sparkplug.coffee. Using our HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. Add a /HYES to make that happen. And yes, I just asked you to be a dear, like I'm a grandmother. Well, it will be 50 in less than a month. I'm allowed to sound like a geezer. And that's that. Thanks a lot for listening to me give you my thoughts about the feathers. Join us on Monday when we see just how devious Matt Damon can be when he's jealous of Jude Law as we cover The Talented Mr. Ripley. But in the meantime, I'm going to see if I can't win my school of football game by blatantly cheating over and over and over and over, but with comedy. And cut.